things I know now that I wish someone had told me when I was 28 and still believed that love alone was enough to hold a family together. I know now that a person can smile at you across a dinner table while quietly deciding how to destroy you. I know now that the most dangerous prisons don't have bars. They have crown molding and a guest room and a mother-in-law who calls you sweetheart in a tone that makes your skin crawl every single time. I am 34 years old. I run a mid-sized litigation support firm with 11 employees, an office downtown, and a waiting list of clients. My two kids are healthy and loud, and they draw on the wall sometimes, and I don't even care. My life is genuinely good. I want you to hold on to that fact as I take you back to the version of me who was none of those things, the version who was 28, newly married, and so completely desperate to be accepted by her husband's family that she ignored every warning. Her gut was screaming at her for 3 straight years. My husband and I met in graduate school. He was studying urban planning. I was finishing my master's in forensic accounting. He was kind and funny and genuinely the most attentive person I had ever dated. When he talked about his mother, he used words like devoted and old-fashioned and just protective of the people she loves. I heard those words and I filed them away without really examining what they meant. That was my first mistake, but honestly, it wasn't even close to my last. We got married in October, 2 years after we met. Small ceremony, outdoor venue, his mother seated in the front row wearing a cream-colored dress that was, I can only say this now with some dark humor, just pale enough to cause comment. My own mother leaned over to me at the reception and whispered, "That woman is going to be a project." I laughed it off. My mother laughed too. Neither of us knew then how drastically she would be proven right. The first year was fine in the way that first years are sometimes fine, surface smooth, undercurrents strong. My mother-in-law called my husband every single day. Not a quick check-in. A full conversation, usually at dinner time, usually while I was in the kitchen. He would take the call in the living room and I would try to be understanding about it and usually manage it for about 20 minutes before I'd bring food to the table slightly louder than necessary. She lived 40 minutes away. She had opinions about how we organized our pantry, which she shared freely whenever she visited, which was frequently. She had a key to our apartment that my husband had given her before we were married, and which he never asked back. I asked him once carefully if we could maybe request it returned. He looked genuinely confused, like I had asked him to explain a math problem he had never encountered before. "She'd never just show up unannounced," he said. "She showed up unannounced the following Tuesday." I want to be fair here because I think fairness matters even when you're telling a story about people who weren't fair to you. My mother-in-law was not a cartoonish villain at first. She was a woman who had raised her son largely alone after her husband walked out when my husband was 9 years old. She had sacrificed. She had held things together. Her son was her entire life's project, and I had walked in and complicated the architecture of that project simply by existing. I understood it on some intellectual level. I just did not understand how far she was willing to go to reclaim her position as the most important person in his life. The first real crack appeared about 18 months in. My husband's grandfather died and left an estate that included a significant trust structured to pass down through his direct bloodline. My husband stood to inherit once he had children of his own. This was not a secret. Everyone in the family knew it. What changed after the grandfather died was my mother-in-law's energy toward me. It shifted in a way that was hard to name at the time, but that I can now describe precisely. She went from passively undermining me to actively monitoring me. She started asking about our family planning with a frequency that felt clinical. She started mentioning the trust in casual conversation more than was natural. She started watching me the way someone watches a chess piece that is not yet moved but could move at any moment. I got pregnant in the spring of my third year of marriage. I was terrified and thrilled in equal measure. My husband cried when I showed him the test. That part was real, and it was beautiful, and I am glad I have that memory, because what followed made it hard to hold on to the good parts. I made the mistake, and I knew even at the time that it was a risk, of telling my mother-in-law before we had told most other people. My husband wanted to tell her early. He said she would be hurt if she wasn't among the first to know. I agreed, because I was still trying. I was still in the phase where I believed that if I just extended enough grace, enough patience, enough good faith, she would eventually meet me somewhere in the middle. We went to her house on a Sunday. She had made lunch. The whole thing felt warm and almost normal. When we told her, she went very still for a moment. Then she smiled. Then she asked, in a voice like sweet tea with something rotten underneath it, whether we were certain about the timing, whether the pregnancy was, as she put it, planned. My husband said yes, of course. Why would that matter? She said it didn't matter. She was just asking. Then she started talking about the trust, and whether the estate attorney had been in contact yet, and whether we understood exactly how the inheritance structure worked. I sat there and I felt something crystallize inside me. Not anger. Not yet. Something colder. Something that said, pay attention. This is what she actually cares about. The next 3 months were a slow escalation. She told my husband, on at least 2 occasions that he later admitted to me, that she had concerns about whether the pregnancy was genuine, whether I might be lying about it or exaggerating, whatever that would even mean, to secure access to the inheritance. This is the part where I have to slow down and make sure I am telling this accurately, because even now it sounds too absurd to be real. My mother-in-law, a grown adult woman, told her son that his wife might be faking a pregnancy for money. My husband, to his credit in those early months, told her that was insane and that she needed to stop. But here is the thing about people who are deeply enmeshed with a parent like this. They can push back in the moment and still not actually protect you. He would say the right words to her and then come home and ask me gentle, searching questions that were clearly planted by her. Had I been to my OB recently? Was everything progressing normally? Did I know when we would find out the sex? These were not the questions of a curious and excited father. These were reconnaissance missions. I started to recognize them. I started to document everything. I had installed a small camera in the entryway of our house after my mother-in-law had let herself in, unannounced, for the third time. I told my husband about it. He thought it was excessive. I kept it anyway. That camera eventually became important, but not in the way I expected. Around month 5, my mother-in-law began a new campaign. She started calling my husband's cousins, his aunts, anyone connected to the grandfather's estate. She told them she had concerns about the legitimacy of the pregnancy. She floated the idea, apparently, that I had manufactured the situation to claim inheritance money. She did this quietly, methodically, the way someone who has spent a lifetime managing a family's social ecosystem knows how to do. I did not find out the full scope of it until much later. At the time, I only knew that family members I had previously gotten along with fine had started going strange and cold on me, and I couldn't understand why. The dinner happened in August. My husband suggested we go to his mother's house for a family meal. His aunt and a cousin were visiting from out of state. I did not want to go. I said so carefully, with reasons. He asked me to try. He said it was important to him. He said his mother had promised to behave. I went because I was still trying, and also because I was 8 weeks away from my due date and my husband's need for family peace felt, in that particular moment, more urgent than my instinct to stay home. Dinner was tense in the invisible way those things can be when everyone is performing normalcy over a foundation of actual hostility. I ate carefully because I had been experiencing some nausea that week and I did not want to make a scene. I noticed my mother-in-law had specifically prepared a dish she knew I liked. I noticed her watching me eat it. I noticed she refilled my glass twice without me asking. I noticed all of these things and I told myself I was being paranoid. By the time we got home, I felt genuinely ill. Not the pregnancy nausea I had grown accustomed to. Something different. Something worse. I spent most of the night in the bathroom. By early morning, my husband had driven me to the hospital. By the time we arrived, I was in enough distress that they took me directly to monitoring. My husband called his mother from the waiting room while I was being assessed. I found out later he had called her. I found out later she had arrived. What I knew at the time was that I was lying in a hospital bed, frightened and exhausted, and when the door opened and my mother-in-law walked in ahead of my husband, the first words out of her mouth were not, "Are you all right?" The first words out of her mouth were directed at the on-call physician, and they were questioning whether the fetal monitoring was accurate and whether I might have induced my own symptoms for attention. I want to be clear about what the room looked like at that moment because some of you will have the same reaction to this that I had, which is disbelief. It was just her and my husband, and the doctor and a nurse. No extended family, no courtroom audience. Just four people, and one of them was standing at the foot of my hospital bed while I was in documented medical distress, attempting to convince a physician that I was faking it. The doctor, and I will be grateful to her for the rest of my life, looked at my mother-in-law with an expression I can only describe as precise and said, clearly and without drama, that she needed to either take a seat or leave the room. My mother-in-law sat down. She did not apologize. She folded her hands in her lap and watched me with an expression I had never seen on her face before. Not hatred exactly. Something more like calculation. I looked at my husband. He was standing slightly behind his mother. He had not said a single word. I delivered early due to the complications, but everything was okay. My daughter was okay. I was okay. These are the facts I held on to in the days that followed, because the days that followed were very bad. While I was still in the hospital, my mother-in-law contacted the estate attorney. I know this because the estate attorney, to his credit, flagged the inquiry to my husband. She had called to ask whether a documented miscarriage would alter the terms of the inheritance structure. She had called to ask this while I was in a hospital room 2 floors up with her son's daughter in a warming crib. My husband came to my room that evening looking like he had seen something fundamental collapse. He sat in the chair beside the bed for a long time without speaking. Then he told me what his mother had done. Then he cried. Then he said he was sorry. Then, and this is the part I need you to understand, he said. I just need you to understand where she's coming from. She loves me, and she's scared. I did not say anything. I looked at the ceiling. I thought about the camera in our entryway. I thought about every documented conversation I had saved on my phone. I thought about the 3 years of small erosions that had built to this moment. I thought about my daughter 6 feet away in a warming crib born early because of stress and a dinner I had not wanted to attend, and I thought about what kind of world I was planning to raise her in. And I made a decision. Not an angry decision. A clear one. I called my sister the next morning. She drove 3 hours to get there. While my husband went home to sleep and shower, my sister sat with me and I told her everything. Not the curated, protected version I had been telling for 3 years. Everything. She listened without interrupting, which she almost never does, and when I finished she said, "Okay, what do you need?" What I needed was an attorney. What I needed was to understand my financial position. What I needed, it turned out, was to have been paying closer attention to our joint finances than I had been. Because when I started looking, and forensic accounting is in fact my area of expertise, I found some things that had been very carefully obscured. My mother-in-law had been managing a discretionary account connected to the grandfather's estate. My husband had signed paperwork, years before we met, giving her signatory authority over certain administrative decisions. This was not unusual on its face. What was unusual was that over the past 2 years, several modest transfers had been made to accounts I did not recognize, timed in a way that correlated with specific events in our marriage, our wedding, the announcement of my pregnancy, the hospitalization, nothing overtly criminal at first glance. The kind of thing that a non-specialist might see and explain away. The kind of thing that I was professionally trained to look at very carefully. I spent 6 weeks after leaving the hospital doing what I do. I built a timeline. I mapped the transactions. I cross-referenced dates. I pulled every document I had access to and a few I had to request formally. My sister helped. A colleague I trusted helped. I did not tell my husband what I was doing. I was not ready to have that conversation yet, and I needed to know what I was looking at before I said anything to anyone. What I found was not small. My mother-in-law had, over approximately 26 months, redirected a not insignificant portion of the estate's accessible liquidity through a series of layered transfers designed to obscure the movement. Some of it had gone to her personal accounts. Some of it was more complicated. The purpose, as best as I could reconstruct it, was to reduce the calculable value of the estate in advance of my having children, to reduce what my husband, and by extension our family, would ultimately inherit. She had been doing this quietly and consistently, and she had believed no one would look closely enough to find it. She had apparently not considered the possibility that her son would marry someone whose entire career was built on finding exactly this kind of thing. I want to say something about my husband here, because I think this part is important. He was not part of it. I verified this as carefully as I verified everything else. He was not complicit in what his mother had done. He was, however, so thoroughly conditioned to trust her, to defer to her, to protect the family narrative at all costs, that he had signed documents without reading them and taken her word on financial matters he should have scrutinized and looked the other way, on behaviors he should have confronted. He was not a criminal. But he was not a partner either. He had chosen again and again, without ever quite acknowledging that he was choosing, to protect his mother over his wife. There is a particular kind of loneliness in being married to someone like that. I do not have to be angry about it anymore. But it was real. I filed for divorce in November. My husband found out about the financial investigation at the same time he found out about the divorce, because I had coordinated carefully with my attorney to ensure both happened simultaneously. I did not do this to be cruel. I did it because I knew, based on 3 years of watching this family operate, that if either piece of information was disclosed first, the other would be buried. My mother-in-law was referred to the district attorney's office based on the documentation I compiled. The estate attorney cooperated fully once he understood what he was looking at. Her own attorney apparently spent a long time reviewing the case before agreeing to represent her, which tells you something about the quality of the documentation I produced. My husband called me the night after everything came out. He was not angry exactly. He was devastated in the way that people are devastated when the person they built their entire self-conception around turns out to have been doing something they can never forgive. I listened to him. I was kind to him, genuinely. Because I did not hate him. I just could not be with him. There is a difference, and it took me a long time to fully understand it, between forgiving someone and choosing to remain in the structure that broke you. He asked me if I had known for a long time. I told him when I had started looking. He asked why I hadn't told him sooner. I told him the truth, because every time I had brought him information about his mother before, he had found a way to explain it, contextualize it, make it manageable, make me feel like I was the one perceiving the situation incorrectly. I could not risk doing that again with information this significant. He was quiet for a while. Then he said, "I didn't protect you." I said, "No, you didn't." Then I told him goodnight and hung up. My daughter is 2 years old now. She is in a room full of primary colors and she laughs at things that aren't funny. And she has my husband's eyes and I love her in a way that reorganizes everything I thought I knew about what mattered. My mother-in-law is navigating a legal process that is not my business to narrate in detail. My ex-husband has begun, slowly and with the help of a good therapist, to build something more honest than what we had. He is a decent father. I can say that and mean it. My firm takes on about 2 new clients a quarter now. I specialize in exactly what you would expect, given everything: estate irregularities, undisclosed transfers, discretionary account mismanagement. I know what to look for. I know where people hide things because I had a very expensive impersonal education in exactly that subject. People who know my story sometimes ask me if I'm bitter. I think they expect me to say no, that I've healed, that I've moved past it. The honest answer is more complicated. I am not bitter. But I am not naive anymore either, and I think that is worth something. I was raised to believe that family loyalty was sacred, and that keeping the peace was a virtue, and that good women compromise and adjust and absorb. I believed those things genuinely, for a long time, and they cost me more than I want to calculate. What I know now, sitting in an office I built, looking at a city I chose, raising a child I get to actually protect, is that the moment I stopped trying to be acceptable to people who had decided I was a threat, that was not a failure. That was the most useful thing I ever did for myself. Nobody gets to decide your worth from inside a web of financial fraud and generational control and call it love. Nobody gets to poison the structure and then hand you the bill for the renovation. My daughter handed me a crayon last week, very seriously, like it was a gift of great importance. I took it and I drew a lopsided house with a door and a window and 2 stick people standing outside it. She looked at it for a moment, deciding. Then she picked up a yellow crayon and drew a sun so large it took up half the page. I put it on the wall of my office where I can see it from my desk. That is what I did with the ruins. I put a sum on the wall. If you are carrying something similar, if there is someone in your life who has been quietly deciding your value, managing your access, eroding your foundation one slow transaction at a time. I want you to know that looking clearly at the thing in front of you is not betrayal. It is the beginning. Your peace is not something you negotiate, it is something you build with good materials on ground that is actually yours. There is a version of me that still lives in that apartment, still refilling her mother-in-law's water glass at dinner, still telling herself that one more year of patience would fix something that was never going to be fixed. I think about that version of me sometimes, not with pity, with something closer to recognition, the way you recognize a road you took once that led somewhere you never meant to go. What I understand now, having been through the whole of it, is that the outcome of my story was not accidental. My mother-in-law did not end up facing legal consequences because the universe decided to balance the scales on my behalf. She ended up there because she made choices, compounding and deliberate, and because those choices left evidence, and because I had spent years building the exact skill set required to find it. That is not luck. That is cause meeting consequence in the most direct way possible. Every transfer she authorized, every document she manipulated, every quiet phone call to a cousin or an attorney. Each one was a decision, and decisions accumulate. The structure she built to protect herself became the structure that exposed her. I think about integrity a lot these days, not as a concept you declare about yourself, but as something you either practice quietly or you don't. My mother-in-law had the appearance of it for years, the devoted widow, the protective mother, the keeper of family tradition. But underneath the appearance was a pattern of choices that treated other people as obstacles rather than human beings. You cannot sustain that forever. The version of reality you construct when you operate without integrity is inherently unstable. It requires constant maintenance, constant manipulation, constant vigilance. Eventually, the maintenance fails. The thing that actually saved me was not courage in the dramatic sense. It was clarity. It was the decision to look at what was actually in front of me, instead of what I wished was there. That takes a specific kind of intellectual honesty that I had been actively avoiding for 3 years, because the truth was uncomfortable, and the alternative, believing my husband would eventually choose me, believing his mother would eventually soften, was so much easier to hold. The moment I stopped trying to make the facts fit a more bearable story, everything changed, not immediately, not painlessly, but fundamentally. And then there was the staying power required to do what came next. 6 weeks of documentation, legal coordination, sleepless nights with an infant, building a case while rebuilding a life simultaneously. Nobody hands you that kind of endurance. You find out you have it because the situation demands it, and you either rise to meet the demand or you don't. I found out I had more in me than I had ever been asked to use before. And that knowledge, that specific hard-earned knowledge of your own capacity, is something no one can touch once you have it. My daughter is going to grow up watching me run something I built. I hope she internalizes, somewhere underneath the noise of ordinary childhood, that the women who built things did so because they refused to accept someone else's assessment of their limits as fact. That is the only inheritance I am interested in passing down.